The biggest political contests of 2017 were defined by their asymmetries, in funding, in ideology and, most viscerally, in strategy. On one side were those who saw everything as a battle and sought whatever advantage they could find. On the other were those devoted to what they thought were shared systems, norms, and language, who spent most of the year increasingly beleaguered and struggling to find words. The month before he lost his state's special Senate election, the Alabama theocrat Roy Moore was accused by multiple women of extensive sexual misconduct. The day after the Washington Post published its initial article on the allegations, another woman reached out to the paper asking for a meeting. She had been a young teenager, she would claim. When Moore approached her, he got her pregnant, and she had an abortion at age 15. The allegations were stunning. But Post reporters quickly deduced that they were also false, fabricated by an operative for Project Veritas, an organization led by the right-wing activist James O'Keefe, in an effort to trick the paper into publishing false claims, thereby discrediting its earlier reporting. When the paper later detailed its interactions with the operative, its executive editor, Martin Barron, explained that any agreements she had made to remain off the record were invalid, entered into by a fraud acting in maliciously bad faith. To many, bad faith is the phrase that seems to capture our entire moment, in all its mendacity and duplicitousness and engineered confusion. In December, when MSNBC dropped the contract of a contributor, Sam Seder, over a crude joke he made on Twitter in 2009, bad faith provided the most concise explanation. The joke was, by any credible reading, intended to mock people in Hollywood who continued to work with Roman Polanski after he pleaded guilty to unlawful sexual intercourse with a minor. But another right-wing personality, Mike Cernovich, had excavated it and claimed, with disingenuous concern and abundantly clear ill will, that it meant the opposite, summoning a waiting, on-the-game audience to perform outrage and concern to MSNBC's parent company and sponsors. The phrase captured this familiar process, the willful misreading being wielded as a threat, the vexing figure pretending to care about something important in order to accomplish something vengeful or petty, the galling attempts to play dumb, the sneering claim that, well, I didn't make the rules. When a social media counter-campaign was mounted in Seder's defense, it consisted largely of accusations and descriptions of bad faith. Seder's contract was eventually reinstated. This version of bad faith falls somewhere among a lawyer's claim of intentional dishonesty. This contract was entered into in bad faith. Sartre's critique of inauthenticity, do you even believe what you're saying? And a broad, satisfying, barbed insult, you bad. For liberals and centrists and dispossessed conservatives, it can feel like a way to reclaim power. To simply note the facts in a tone of disbelief, say, that multiple government agencies were now being run by people who had recently considered those agencies illegitimate has gotten exhausting. Bad faith goes beyond these symptoms to diagnose an underlying pathology. It can be used to describe legislators who railed against the hasty passage of Obamacare, which was subjected to public and legislative debate and passed with concessions to its opponents, only to try to repeal it in utter secrecy, or who spent years warning about the budget deficit in apocalyptic terms only to vote for a tax bill that would increase it significantly. In polling in December, CNN and SSRS found only 27% of respondents agreeing that President Trump and the Republicans in Congress made a good faith effort to cooperate with the minority party on their tax bill. Strategic antagonism and manipulation find a natural medium on social platforms. A service like Twitter all but demands bad faith. It's a place where fresh identities can be created and performed, often anonymously, and the stakes are only as high as the value you ascribe to not being banned. It's a service where the official regulations are vague, selfing, and haphazardly enforced, and therefore maximally prone to exploitation. To the extent that users have a social contract on Twitter, it's with Twitter, not with one another. On social media, charges of bad faith can address everything from automated spam to interpersonal conflict to the breakdown of political discourse. The question is whether identifying bad faith can do anything to combat it. And the answer is, of course not. In theory, an accusation of bad faith derives its power from the presence of some persuadable audience, some judge or observer or swing voter who recognizes strategic dishonesty and is repelled by it. But in our utterly polarized political reality, the idea of finding some unaligned, reasonable-minded mass to appeal to feels like an absurd fantasy. Instead, accusations of bad faith are laid directly at the feet of the bad faith actors themselves, with one inevitable result: now even the words bad faith are used in bad faith. When the MSNBC host Chris Hayes, discussing Sam Sater's brief firing, tweeted that the entire culture and our politics are now dominated by people who have weaponized bad faith and shamelessness, one response came from Donald Trump Jr., who provided what felt like an algebraic proof of Hayes's point. "I agree with this fully," he tweeted. "Mainstream media has done exactly that for decades, but the people have finally caught on and aren't buying the BS anymore." The sheer satisfaction offered by bad faith is a sure sign of its impotence. It's an invitation to dismiss powerful political actors as lost causes. But its speakers stubbornly refuse to admit that it also describes their own inability to force their enemies to play by the rules. The Atlantic's Megan Garber recently identified one major problem with the new use of bad faith. As a description, it is both conveniently expansive and conveniently specific. It is, despite its legal and philosophical trappings, most often deployed ad hominem, for the satisfaction of allies. Bad faith, Garber writes, is not concerned with individual claims of truth, or with individual lies, so much as it alleges someone's dishonesty as an overarching condition. It does not help that the people whom liberals are most eager to accuse of bad faith already have their own version of this claim. Among internet-native right-wingers, the phrase virtue signaling has long done similar work, suggesting that the social justice rhetoric of progressives is only a form of self-righteous, hypocritical point scoring. This, too, was conveniently expansive and conveniently specific, but it also zeroes in on a real human insecurity, the fear among many well-meaning and comparatively well-off liberals that their lifestyles and attitudes didn't measure up to their egalitarian ideals. The accusation is intentionally dismissive and nasty, but it at least has the potential to wound so long as the people being accused really do aspire, in good faith, to live up to their own values. But if you really believe that your enemy is acting in bad faith, calling him or her out won't get you far. Being accused of duplicitousness doesn't hurt if the duplicitousness is a conscious strategy. The charge will also have been anticipated. There is an entire genre of Trump apologetic, practiced by cable news pundits and manifested on sites like Gateway Pundit and InfoWars, based on justifying strategic disingenuousness. Any criticism of the administration is met with some combination of "the left did it first" and "we have no choice" and "what about?" The bad faith actor will claim, in other words, that his bad faith is both justified and necessary, that all possibility of good faith engagement was exhausted long ago and it was not his fault. You may insist that your opponents respect your positions, your arguments, your facts. But it is a powerful manifestation of privilege to expect that they will see you as worthy of that respect. Shouting bad faith can sound like shouting no fair and revealing your previously undisturbed expectation that you will always be treated fairly. So when bad faith does run into consequences, those consequences tend to be self-inflicted. After the Alabama election, Alex Marlow, editor-in-chief of Breitbart, admitted in a CNN interview that he thought at least one of the sexual assault accusations against Roy Moore had a lot of credibility and made him uncomfortable. Moore, he said, was a weak candidate. But Marlow defended his site's militantly pro-Moore coverage and its numerous attempts to discredit Moore's accusers. I think they want to create a standard where President Trump, either from past or future accusations, will not be able to match whatever standard is now in place for who can be a United States Senator, he said, referring to other media outlets. I think that's the playbook here. And I think it's part of the reason why it was so important for Breitbart to continue our coverage of the way we covered it. In his account, this wasn't dissonance, it was strategy. He could justify this nihilistic tactic by reflexively claiming that other media did it first, leaving him no choice but to push back. This is a remarkable thing to announce openly, and it looks a lot like projection. If you justify your actions as the dictates of tactical playbooks, you may assume that everyone else is doing the same. It illustrates the principal risk of acting in bad faith toward others, which is that somewhere along the line, you start to believe yourself.